I thought I knew what betrayal felt like until I found my husband's Dubai boarding passes hidden in his golf bag. 2 tickets. 2 names. Neither one of them mine. Hey beautiful souls watching this, before we dive into this story that literally changed everything about how I see love and revenge, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Your support means the world to me, and trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one because what I'm about to share will make you question everything you think you know about marriage, loyalty, and just how far someone will go when pushed to their absolute breaking point. My name is Rebecca, and 3 months ago, I was living what I thought was the perfect suburban life in Westchester County, New York. Married to James for 8 years, living in our dream house with the white picket fence, 2 golden retrievers named Honey and Buster, and what I believed was unshakable trust between us. I was 34, working part-time as a freelance graphic designer while playing the devoted housewife role that James seemed to love so much. I made his coffee every morning, laid out his suits, packed his lunches with little notes that said things like "Have an amazing day, my love, and can't wait to see you tonight." God, writing those notes feels so pathetic now. James worked in corporate finance, traveling frequently for what he called high-stakes international deals. Dubai, London, Singapore, places that sounded exotic and important when he'd kiss me goodbye at the airport, promising to bring me back something special. He always did. Designer perfumes, silk scarves, jewelry that made our neighbors jealous. I thought those gifts were proof of his love. I thought his success was our success. I thought those business trips were sacrifices he made for our future. I was so incredibly, devastatingly wrong. The first crack in my perfect world came on a Tuesday morning in September. James had been unusually secretive about his phone, taking calls in the garage, stepping outside when texts came in. When I asked about it, he'd kiss my forehead and say something about confidential client information. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because admitting doubt would mean admitting that maybe I didn't know my husband at all. But that Tuesday morning, he forgot his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. It buzzed once, twice, 3 times. The preview messages were visible on the lock screen, and my heart stopped when I saw the name, Isabella Reed. The messages were innocuous enough. Can't wait for next week, and the suite looks incredible, but something about them made my stomach twist into knots. Who was Isabella Reed? In 8 years of marriage, James had never mentioned anyone by that name. Not a colleague, not a client, not a friend. When he came downstairs in his towel, hair still dripping, I asked him about it as casually as I could manage. "Oh, Isabella? She's a new client from the Dubai project. Very demanding. Wants constant updates." He grabbed his phone, glanced at the messages, and deleted them right in front of me. Real estate mogul. You know how these wealthy types can be. The way he deleted those messages without even reading them properly should have been my first red flag. But I swallowed my suspicions like bitter medicine and poured him another cup of coffee instead. Over the next few weeks, Isabella Reed became a constant presence in our house without ever actually being there. James would mention her constantly. Isabella this, Isabella that. How she was revolutionizing luxury hospitality in Dubai, how she was brilliant and sophisticated and understood the international market in ways that impressed even him. He spoke about her with a reverence that he'd stopped using when he talked about me years ago. The travel increased too. Weekend trips that used to be optional suddenly became mandatory. Dinners that ran until midnight. Conference calls that required him to lock himself in his home office for hours at a time. Our sex life, which had never been earth-shattering but had been consistent and comfortable, dwindled to almost nothing. When I tried to initiate, he'd claim exhaustion or stress or an early morning meeting. I started feeling like a ghost in my own life, watching my husband fall in love with someone else in slow motion while he looked right through me. The breaking point came when he announced his latest trip to Dubai. 3 weeks, he said. The longest he'd ever been away. Something about finalizing a massive deal that would set us up for life. He was so excited, practically bouncing around the house as he packed his expensive suits and cologne that I'd bought him for our anniversary. "I wish I could come with you," I said, half joking, while he folded his shirts with unusual care. "Dubai sounds amazing. Maybe we could finally take that honeymoon we never had." The look he gave me was like ice water in my veins. Not angry, not guilty, just dismissive. Like I'd suggested something completely unreasonable. Rebecca, you know this is work. Intensive work. I'll be in meetings 18 hours a day. You'd be bored out of your mind, and honestly, I'd be worried about taking care of you when I need to focus completely on this deal. Taking care of me. Like I was a burden instead of his wife. But it was what he said next that truly shattered me. Besides, someone needs to stay home and take care of Honey and Buster. They get anxious when we're both gone, and you're so good with them. You're such a natural caretaker, Becca. It's one of the things I love most about you. A natural caretaker. Not his lover, not his partner, not the woman whose body he craved or whose mind challenged him. A caretaker. Someone to watch his dogs while he lived his real life with someone else. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay in our bed staring at the ceiling and crying silent tears that felt like they were burning tracks down my cheeks. 8 years of marriage, and I'd become a house-sitter in my own life. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. Sometimes it gives you exactly what you need to see, right when you're strong enough to handle the truth, even when that truth will destroy everything you thought you knew about your life. James left for Dubai on a Thursday morning in October. I drove him to the airport, kissed him goodbye like the dutiful wife I'd trained myself to be, and watched him disappear into the terminal with 2 large suitcases and excitement radiating from every pore of his body. He was practically vibrating with anticipation, checking his phone constantly, smiling at messages I couldn't see. If you've ever had that gut feeling that something is terribly wrong, you know what I'm talking about. It starts as a whisper in your subconscious and grows into a scream that you can't ignore no matter how hard you try. That feeling followed me home from the airport and settled into my bones like arthritis. I tried to distract myself. I deep cleaned the house, organized closets that were already organized, baked cookies that I ended up throwing away because they tasted like sawdust in my mouth. I took Honey and Buster on longer walks than usual, as if their golden fur and unconditional love could somehow fill the growing hole in my chest. By Saturday, I was going insane with suspicion and loneliness. I called my sister Patricia, who lived in Portland and had never liked James from the day I introduced them. Patricia had this way of seeing through people that was both a blessing and a curse. He's in Dubai, I told her over FaceTime while I curled up on our leather couch with a glass of wine that I was drinking too fast. 3 weeks for some massive deal. Patricia's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. 3 weeks. That's a long time for any business deal, Becca. Even international ones. He says it's complicated. High stakes. Could set us up for life. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. Have you ever looked at his credit card statements? Travel receipts? The question hit me like a slap. In 8 years of marriage, I'd never questioned James's finances. He handled all the big expenses, gave me access to our joint checking account for household stuff, and I trusted him completely with everything else. He made more money than me, he was better with numbers, and I was grateful not to have to deal with the stress of managing investments and business expenses. But Patricia's question planted a seed that I couldn't ignore. He keeps all that stuff in his office, I said slowly. Says it's too boring for me to worry about. Becca. Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. You're his wife, not his employee. You have every right to know where your family money is going. After I hung up with Patricia, I found myself standing outside James's home office like I was about to commit a crime. He'd always kept it locked when he traveled, saying he had confidential client information that couldn't risk being exposed. I'd respected that boundary for years, never questioning it, never pushing. But I wasn't the same woman who'd driven him to the airport 2 days ago. Something had shifted inside me, some combination of Patricia's words and my own growing desperation to understand why I felt so disconnected from my own husband. I knew where he hid the spare key. I'd seen him retrieve it once when he couldn't find his main set, tucked behind a picture frame of us from our wedding day. The irony wasn't lost on me as I moved our smiling faces aside and felt around for the small silver key. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door to his office. It felt like crossing a line that I could never uncross, but I was beyond caring about marriage etiquette. I needed to know. James's office was meticulously organized, just like everything else in his life. File cabinets with labeled sections, a desk that was completely clear except for his laptop dock and a single pen. Bank statements in chronological order, travel receipts sorted by date and destination. I started with the most recent travel folder, labeled Dubai, October 2024. What I found inside made my legs give out. I had to sit down in his leather chair just to keep from falling over. 2 boarding passes. James Patterson and Isabella Reed. First-class tickets on Emirates Airlines. But these weren't just business travel arrangements, they were seated together, 2A and 2B, on every single flight. The hotel reservation was for a suite at the Burj Al Arab, the most romantic hotel in Dubai, booked under both their names for 3 weeks. But that wasn't even the worst part. I kept digging through the folder with hands that were shaking so hard I could barely hold the papers. Dinner reservations for 2 at the most exclusive restaurants in Dubai. Couples spa treatments. A private yacht charter for 2 people. Shopping receipts for jewelry that I'd never seen. Expensive jewelry, the kind you buy for someone you want to impress, someone you're falling in love with. And then I found the pictures. Hidden in the very back of the folder, printed on photo paper like they were precious memories to be cherished. James and a woman I'd never seen before, but who was clearly Isabella Reed. She was stunning, tall, elegant, with long dark hair and the kind of sophisticated beauty that belongs on magazine covers. But what destroyed me wasn't how beautiful she was. It was how happy James looked. In 8 years of marriage, I had never, not once, seen my husband look at me the way he was looking at Isabella in these photos. Like she was the most fascinating person in the world, like he couldn't believe his luck in being near her. They were at dinner together, walking on beaches together, laughing together in ways that spoke of inside jokes and deep connection. There were pictures of them in hotel robes on what looked like a private balcony. Pictures of them holding hands in souks and markets. Pictures of them kissing like teenagers who just discovered love for the first time. My husband was living an entirely different life. A life where he was passionate and romantic and spontaneous, all the things he'd stopped being with me years ago. And I'd been so busy being the perfect housewife that I'd never even noticed I'd lost him completely. I don't remember how long I sat in that chair, staring at those pictures and trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Long enough for the sun to set outside his office window. Long enough for my legs to go numb and my wine glass to sit forgotten and warm on his desk. When I finally stood up, I wasn't the same person who'd sat down. Something had broken inside me, but something else had awakened too. Something that felt dangerous and powerful and completely unfamiliar. I carefully put everything back exactly where I'd found it, locked the office door, and replaced the key behind our wedding photo. Then I went upstairs, ran a hot bath, and started planning. Because if James thought he could live a double life while I played house with his dogs, he was about to learn just how wrong he could be. Some women fall apart when they discover their husband's betrayal. Others get angry and confront immediately. But I did something different. I got methodical. Over the next 48 hours, I transformed from a trusting housewife into a detective with a singular mission: learn everything there was to know about Isabella Reed and my husband's secret life. If James thought he could compartmentalize me into the home section of his existence while living his real dreams with someone else, he was about to discover that I was much more capable than he'd ever given me credit for. I started with social media, which was both easier and more devastating than I'd expected. Isabella Reed wasn't hiding. Her Instagram account was public, filled with pictures of her glamorous life as a luxury real estate developer. She lived in Manhattan, owned multiple properties across the globe, and had the kind of sophisticated lifestyle that looked effortless but probably cost more than most people make in a year. But it was her recent posts that made my blood turn to ice. 3 weeks ago, right around the time James started talking about Isabella constantly, she'd posted a picture of herself at a wine bar with the caption celebrating new partnerships and unexpected connections. 2 weeks ago, she'd shared a photo of a sunset with sometimes the best business deals come with the most beautiful surprises. And then, just 5 days ago, the day before James left for Dubai, she'd posted a picture of luxury suitcases with designer luggage tags. The caption read, Dubai bound with my favorite business partner. Some deals are worth celebrating properly. My favorite business partner. The casual intimacy of those words hit me like a physical blow. I scrolled back through months of her posts, looking for any trace of my husband, and found subtle evidence everywhere once I knew what to look for. A man's hand reaching for wine in the background of a dinner photo from August. A shadow that could have been James in the reflection of her sunglasses during a solo vacation to the Hamptons. A mention of amazing company during a business trip to London that coincided exactly with one of James's supposed client meetings. They'd been seeing each other for months. Maybe longer. But the real breakthrough came when I found Isabella's LinkedIn profile and started connecting the dots about her business connections. She wasn't just some random real estate developer. She was the CEO of Reed Luxury Properties, and according to her company's website, she'd recently partnered with several international firms to develop high-end resorts in emerging markets, including a firm called Patterson International Holdings. My husband's company. The company I'd helped him start 6 years ago with my inheritance from my grandmother. The company that bore his name and, technically, was half owned by me through our marriage. James wasn't just having an affair with Isabella Reed. He was doing business with her, using resources that were legally mine, spending money that should have been ours on a relationship that was destroying our marriage. The more I researched, the more I realized how elaborate and long-term this betrayal was. This wasn't some impulsive fling or momentary weakness. This was a calculated relationship that had been building for months, involving business partnerships, international travel, and a level of emotional intimacy that James had been denying me for years. I was so deep in my research that I almost missed the most important discovery of all. While cross-referencing business filings and partnership agreements, I stumbled across something that stopped me cold. Isabella Reed wasn't just successful and beautiful and stealing my husband. She was married. Her husband's name was David Reed, and according to his own LinkedIn profile, he was a successful surgeon at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan. They'd been married for 12 years, had no children, and from what I could tell from their combined social media presence, had what looked like a stable, successful marriage. David Reed had no idea that his wife was carrying on an elaborate affair with my husband. And suddenly, I had an ally. That night, I found David Reed's contact information through the hospital directory. I stared at his phone number for hours, debating whether to call him, whether to send an email, whether to drive to Manhattan and show up at his hospital like some kind of vengeful soap opera character. But then I remembered something James had said during one of his many conversations about Isabella. He'd mentioned that she traveled frequently for business, often for weeks at a time, and that she was incredibly dedicated to her work. At the time, I'd assumed he was just impressed by her work ethic. Now I realized he was probably explaining away her absences to her own husband the same way he'd been explaining away his absences to me. David Reed was living the same lie I was living. The only difference was that he didn't know it yet. I decided to call him the next morning, but before I could lose my nerve, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. My heart stopped when I answered and heard James's voice, calling from Dubai. "Hey baby, how are things at home?" His voice was warm and affectionate, the same tone he'd used with me for 8 years, and it made me feel sick to hear it now. "Everything's fine," I managed to say, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles went white. "How's the business trip going?" "Oh, you know how these things are. Long days, boring meetings, too much rich food." He laughed, and I could hear happiness in his voice that definitely wasn't coming from boring meetings. "I miss you though. Miss our quiet evenings at home." Our quiet evenings. Code for, I miss having someone to take care of my dogs and my house while I live my real life somewhere else. "I miss you too." I lied, because what else was I supposed to say? I miss the version of you that I thought existed. I miss the marriage I thought we had. We talked for 10 more minutes about nothing, the dogs, the weather, a neighbor's new fence. Normal married couple conversation that felt like poison in my mouth. When he hung up, probably to go meet Isabella for another romantic dinner overlooking the Persian Gulf, I sat on my kitchen floor and cried until I couldn't breathe. But then I dried my tears, picked myself up, and did something I'd never done before in 8 years of marriage. I called in sick to my own life. I cancelled the grocery delivery, postponed the cleaning lady, asked my neighbor to watch Honey and Buster for a few days. Then I booked myself a flight to New York City and reserved a hotel room near Mount Sinai Hospital. If James and Isabella thought they were the only ones capable of planning romantic surprises, they were about to be proven very, very wrong. Meeting David Reed was like looking into a mirror that reflected a different kind of betrayal. We were both married to people who had mastered the art of living double lives, but where I was drowning in suspicion and hurt, he was still floating in blissful ignorance. I'd spent hours crafting the perfect approach. Too direct and I'd sound like a crazy woman. Too subtle and he might not take me seriously. In the end, I decided on honesty with a strategic presentation of evidence. I found him leaving Mount Sinai Hospital on a Tuesday evening, looking exactly like his photos, tall, distinguished, with graying temples that made him look sophisticated rather than old. He was checking his phone as he walked, probably texting his wife who was currently sharing a romantic dinner with my husband halfway around the world. "Excuse me, are you Dr. David Reed?" I approached him carefully, my heart hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. He looked up from his phone with the polite but slightly wary expression of someone who gets recognized in public occasionally. "Yes, that's me. Are you a patient?" "No, I'm." I took a deep breath, knowing that my next words would change both of our lives forever. "I'm Rebecca Patterson. I believe our spouses know each other." The confusion that crossed his face was so genuine and immediate that I felt a pang of guilt for what I was about to do to his world. "Patterson? I don't think Isabella's mentioned. Wait, are you in real estate too?" "Not exactly." I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the photos I'd found in James's office, the one of James and Isabella kissing on what looked like a private beach. "I'm married to this man. James Patterson. Your wife has been seeing him for months." I watched David's face go through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, recognition, and then something that looked like his entire reality cracking apart. He stared at the photo for what felt like forever, his face growing paler by the second. This can't be right," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Isabella's in Dubai for work. She's been there for 3 days. She calls me every night." "I'm sure she does," I said gently, pulling up another photo. "Just like my husband calls me every night to tell me about his boring meetings and long work days. Meanwhile, they're doing this." The second photo showed James and Isabella at what was clearly an exclusive restaurant, feeding each other dessert like newlyweds. They looked so happy, so completely absorbed in each other, that it was almost beautiful in its intensity. David made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She said she was having dinner with clients. She always has dinner with clients when she travels." "I have more photos if you need to see them," I offered, but he shook his head quickly. No, I can see what this is." He ran his hands through his hair and looked around like he was trying to figure out where he was. Jesus Christ. 12 years of marriage. 12 years. We stood there on the sidewalk outside the hospital, two people whose lives had just imploded, surrounded by the normal chaos of New York City evening rush hour. People walked past us living their regular lives while ours fell apart in real time. "There's more," I said after giving him a moment to process. "It's not just personal. They're business partners too. Your wife's company has deals with my husband's firm. They've been mixing business and pleasure for months, traveling together, using company money for personal trips." David's expression shifted from devastation to something harder, more calculating. "Show me." We found a quiet coffee shop a few blocks away, and I spread out everything I'd discovered over the past week. Bank statements, travel receipts, business contracts, photos, social media posts, a complete timeline of betrayal that painted a picture of two people who had systematically lied to their spouses while building a relationship that was both romantic and financially intertwined. "The yacht charter in Dubai," David said, studying one of the receipts. "She told me she was working 18-hour days. Said she barely had time to eat." James told me the same thing. Said he'd be in meetings constantly, that I'd be bored if I came along. I laughed. but it came out bitter and sharp. Turns out they were planning their romantic getaway while we stayed home like dutiful spouses. David was quiet for a long time, methodically going through each piece of evidence with the same careful attention he probably gave to medical charts. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes had changed. The devastation was still there, but underneath it was something that looked like determination. "What do you want to do about this?" he asked. It was a question I'd been hoping he'd ask, because I'd been thinking about it constantly since I'd discovered his existence. Two betrayed spouses were infinitely more powerful than one, and I had a feeling that David Reed was exactly the kind of ally I needed. "I want them to face consequences," I said carefully. "Real consequences. I want them to understand that actions have repercussions, and that they can't just destroy two marriages and walk away unscathed." "Are you talking about divorce lawyers? Because I have to tell you, Isabella's probably got better attorneys than either of us can afford." I shook my head. "I'm not talking about legal revenge. I'm talking about something more personal, more immediate." David studied my face for a long moment. "You have a plan?" It wasn't a question, and I realized that he was much more perceptive than his wife probably gave him credit for. Isabella had probably been lying to him so smoothly for so long that she'd forgotten he was intelligent enough to notice inconsistencies if they were pointed out to him. "They come back from Dubai in 8 days, I said slowly. "James thinks I'm at home playing housewife, waiting for him with dinner in the oven and questions about his trip that he can deflect with expensive gifts and stories about boring business meetings. Isabella probably expects the same from you." "She does," David confirmed grimly. "She always comes back from trips with presents and stories about difficult clients and successful deals. What if this time, when they come back from their romantic getaway, they found us waiting together? What if instead of coming home to clueless spouses, they walked into a situation they hadn't planned for?" David leaned back in his chair, and I could see him turning the idea over in his mind. "You want to confront them together. I want to show them that we're not the naive, easily manipulated people they think we are. I want them to realize that their secret isn't secret anymore, and that their actions have consequences that extend beyond just the two of them." "And then what?" "We all have a civilized conversation about open marriages and conscious uncoupling." I smiled, and it was probably not a very nice smile. "And then we make them understand that betrayal is a game two can play. That if they want to destroy our marriages, we're perfectly capable of destroying theirs right back." David was quiet for a long time, staring out the coffee shop window at the people walking past. Finally, he turned back to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Isabella loves control," he said slowly. "She loves being the smartest person in the room, the one with all the information and all the power. She spent months orchestrating this affair, probably congratulating herself on how cleverly she's managing both her marriage and her relationship with your husband." "James is the same way," I agreed. "He loves having everything compartmentalized and organized. Home life, work life, secret life, all in neat little boxes that never touch each other. So what you're proposing is essentially chaos." I nodded. Beautiful, unavoidable chaos that they can't control or compartmentalize or explain away. David smiled then, and it was sharp enough to cut glass. "Rebecca Patterson, I think you and I are going to get along very well. Planning revenge with someone who understands your pain is intoxicating in ways I never could have imagined." David and I spent the next 3 days crafting what we came to call Operation Reality Check, a carefully orchestrated plan to ensure that James and Isabella's homecoming would be nothing like what they expected. David turned out to be the perfect partner in calculated chaos. 12 years of marriage to Isabella had taught him her patterns, her weaknesses, and most importantly, her schedule. He knew exactly when she'd be returning from Dubai, what airport she'd use, and how long it would take her to get home to their apartment on the Upper East Side. "She always takes a bath first thing when she gets back from international trips," he told me as we sat in his apartment, a space that was elegant and cold in ways that reminded me of Isabella's Instagram aesthetic. "Says it helps her reset from travel. She'll be in the bathroom for at least an hour, doing her whole skincare routine and decompressing." "James does something similar," I said, making notes on my phone. He always goes straight to his office to catch up on emails, but really he's just trying to switch gears from whatever personality he was being back to being my husband. We were learning so much about each other's marriages, and the similarities were startling. Both James and Isabella were control freaks who managed their double lives with military precision. Both of them used work as an excuse for everything. Both of them had trained their spouses to expect and accept emotional distance disguised as professional dedication. But their predictability was about to become their downfall. The plan we developed was elegant in its simplicity. James and Isabella were scheduled to return to New York on the same flight, something they probably thought was romantic but which gave us the perfect opportunity to coordinate our response. They'd land at JFK at 3:47 p.m. on a Friday, giving them the entire weekend to settle back into their respective lives. Instead, they were going to walk into the most uncomfortable surprise of their lives. "I'll tell Isabella I'm taking her out for a welcome home dinner," David explained as we finalized the details. "Somewhere nice, somewhere she'll dress up for. I'll suggest that new place in Midtown she's been wanting to try, the one with the private dining rooms. And I'll tell James I've planned a surprise to celebrate his successful business trip," I added, feeling a thrill of anticipation that scared me with its intensity. He loves when I make an effort to celebrate his work achievements. Makes him feel like the successful husband he thinks he is. We chose our location carefully. 11 Madison Park, one of the most exclusive restaurants in New York City. Expensive enough that both James and Isabella would be impressed by the gesture, elegant enough that they'd feel comfortable, and busy enough that they couldn't cause a scene without drawing unwanted attention. David had connections through the hospital that got us a private dining room, officially for a medical conference dinner, but actually for the confrontation that was going to change all of our lives. The beauty of our plan was that neither James nor Isabella would suspect anything until it was too late. As far as they knew, their spouses had no idea about each other's existence. They'd been so careful to keep their affair separate from their marriages that the possibility of us meeting would never occur to them. "What if they don't show up?" I asked David during one of our planning sessions. We were sitting in Central Park, looking like any other couple having a casual conversation, while we plotted the destruction of our respective marriages. "They'll show up," David said with confidence. "Isabella never turns down an opportunity to be celebrated, especially after what she thinks was a successful secret trip. And your husband sounds like the type who'd be flattered that you put effort into recognizing his hard work." He was right, of course. James would be thrilled that I was making a fuss over his business success, never suspecting that I knew exactly what kind of business he'd really been conducting in Dubai. But even as we planned and plotted, I found myself having moments of doubt that would hit me like waves of nausea. Was this really who I wanted to become? A woman who plotted elaborate revenge schemes against her husband? Was this really the best way to handle the situation? Then I'd remember the photos of James looking at Isabella like she was the most beautiful woman in the world, the way he used to look at me before I became just another piece of furniture in his carefully organized life. I'd remember how he dismissed my suggestion about joining him in Dubai like I was a child asking for something unreasonable. I'd remember how he'd called me a natural caretaker instead of his wife, his lover, his equal partner. And the doubt would disappear, replaced by something harder and more determined. The day before James and Isabella were scheduled to return, I made my final preparations. I went to my favorite salon and got my hair done, my nails painted, my makeup professionally applied. I bought a new dress, something sophisticated and expensive that made me look like the kind of woman who belonged in exclusive restaurants with powerful men. Looking at myself in the mirror, I realized I hadn't made this kind of effort for James in years. I'd gotten so comfortable being the low-maintenance wife, the woman who was grateful for his attention rather than demanding it, that I'd forgotten I could be someone worth pursuing. But as I admired my reflection, I wasn't getting dressed up for James. I was getting dressed up for me, for the woman I was about to become when I stopped accepting less than I deserved. David texted me that evening with a simple message: "Isabella confirmed for tomorrow at 8 p.m. She's excited about the surprise." I responded, "James is thrilled about his celebration dinner. He has no idea how much we're going to celebrate." That night, I barely slept. I kept running through scenarios, imagining their faces when they realized they'd been caught, wondering how they'd try to explain or excuse or deflect. Would James be angry or embarrassed? Would Isabella try to turn it around and blame me for spying on them? Would they try to make it seem like it was all innocent business cooperation? It didn't matter. By tomorrow night, their secret would be out, their control would be gone, and they'd have to face the consequences of treating their marriages like inconvenient obstacles to their real happiness. I woke up on Friday morning feeling like I was about to go into battle. My phone showed a text from James, sent from Dubai, landing at JFK this afternoon. Can't wait to see you, baby. Hope you've got something special planned for tonight. Something special. If only he knew. I texted back, I've got the perfect surprise waiting for you. You're going to be shocked. For once in 8 years of marriage, I wasn't lying to my husband. The private dining room at 11 Madison Park was perfect for what we had planned, elegant, intimate, and soundproof enough that whatever happened next wouldn't become entertainment for other diners. I arrived 30 minutes early, my heart hammering so hard I was sure everyone in the restaurant could hear it. David was already there, looking distinguished in a dark suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. When he saw me, he stood and gave me a hug that felt like we were old friends instead of two people who'd met less than a week ago. You look incredible, he said, and I could hear the sincerity in his voice. James is going to regret every stupid decision he's ever made when he sees what he threw away. Isabella's going to realize she picked the wrong marriage to destroy, I replied, smoothing down my dress with hands that were surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. We ordered wine, something expensive and celebratory that felt appropriate for the occasion. Not because we were celebrating our marriages, but because we were celebrating the end of our naivety. The end of being taken for granted. The end of accepting less than we deserved. Are you nervous? David asked as we waited. Terrified, I admitted. But also, excited? Is that terrible? I've spent 8 years being the perfect wife, and it got me nowhere. Tonight feels like the first time in years that I'm taking control of my own life. David nodded slowly. Isabella's always been the one calling the shots in our marriage. Where we live, where we vacation, how we spend our money. I told myself I didn't mind because she was successful and driven, but really I think I just got used to being a supporting character in her story. Tonight we become the main characters in our own lives. At exactly 8 o'clock, I heard James's laugh echoing from the restaurant's main dining area. My entire body went rigid with recognition. That laugh that used to make me feel warm and safe now made my stomach clench with betrayal and rage. They are here, I whispered to David, who immediately straightened in his chair. The maître d' appeared at our door moments later. Mrs. Patterson, your husband and his guest have arrived. Shall I show them in? His guest. The formal distance of those words almost made me laugh. If only the maître d' knew that James's guest was the woman who'd been sharing his bed for months while I waited at home like a faithful dog. Please do, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. What happened next will be burned into my memory for the rest of my life. James walked through the door first, looking tanned and relaxed from his Dubai business trip, wearing the expensive shirt I'd given him for his birthday. He was smiling, probably expecting to find me sitting alone, grateful and excited to hear about his successful deal. Instead, he found me sitting next to a man he'd never seen before, both of us dressed like we were on the most important date of our lives. The confusion on his face was almost comical. Becca, I thought, who is this? Before I could answer, Isabella Reed walked into the room behind him. She was even more beautiful in person than in the photos, tall, elegant, with the kind of effortless sophistication that comes from having money and knowing how to use it. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my car, and jewelry that caught the light like captured stars. But what I noticed most was how her face changed when she saw David. The color drained from her cheeks so quickly I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air. For someone who'd spent months orchestrating an elaborate affair, she looked completely unprepared to have her two worlds collide. David! Her voice was barely above a whisper. What are you doing here? I thought you were working tonight. I was, David said calmly, standing up from his chair. But then I met Rebecca, and she had the most interesting things to show me. Pictures from Dubai, actually. Would you like to see them? The moment when James realized who David must be was visible on his face like a physical blow. His eyes widened, then darted between me and David and Isabella like he was trying to solve a puzzle that was beyond his comprehension. I don't understand, James said slowly, his voice tight with panic that he was trying to hide. Becca, what's going on? Who is this man? This is Dr. David Reed, I said, savoring every word. Isabella's husband. You remember Isabella, don't you? Your business partner? The woman you've been taking on romantic trips while I stayed home with your dogs. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. James and Isabella stood frozen in the doorway like they'd been turned to stone, staring at us with expressions that ranged from shock to horror to dawning understanding of just how completely they'd been caught. Isabella recovered first, which didn't surprise me. She was clearly used to thinking on her feet and managing crises. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice regaining some of its strength. David, I don't know what this woman has told you, but James and I are business partners. Nothing more. Business partners, David repeated thoughtfully. He pulled out his phone and showed her one of the photos I'd found, the one of her and James kissing on the beach. Is this how you usually conduct business meetings? Isabella's composed facade cracked. That's not what it looks like. Really? I stood up now, feeling power course through me like electricity. Because it looks exactly like what it is. It looks like you and my husband have been having an affair for months while lying to both of us. It looks like you've been using company money to fund romantic getaways while we stayed home like idiots, trusting you. James finally found his voice, though it came out strangled and desperate. Becca, please, let me explain. This isn't. It's complicated. The business relationship. The business relationship that involves couples spa treatments. I pulled out my own phone, showing him the receipt I'd found in his office. The business relationship that requires private yacht charters and romantic dinners and hotel suites booked under both your names. We can explain everything, Isabella said quickly, moving toward David with her hands outstretched like she was approaching a wild animal. David, honey, you know how business relationships can be in international markets. Sometimes you have to. Stop. David's voice cut through her explanation like a knife. Just stop talking. I've seen the evidence, Isabella. Months of evidence. Photos, receipts, travel records, hotel registrations. I know about the yacht charter. I know about the jewelry you bought for each other. I know about the private beaches and the romantic dinners and the couples massages. Isabella's face went from pale to ashen. How could you possibly know about? Because Rebecca and I have spent the last week comparing notes, David said simply. Turns out our spouses aren't as clever as they think they are. They're just married to people who trusted them completely. The word trusted hung in the air like an accusation. Past tense. Because whatever trust had existed in either of our marriages had died the moment we'd found those boarding passes and photographs. James sat down heavily in one of the empty chairs, his head in his hands. This isn't how I wanted you to find out. How did you want me to find out? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Actually, let me guess, you didn't want me to find out at all. You wanted to keep living your double life indefinitely, taking romantic trips with Isabella while I stayed home being grateful for whatever scraps of attention you gave me. It's not like that, James said weakly, but even he didn't sound convinced by his own words. Then what is it like? David asked, his surgical precision evident in the way he dissected their excuses. Explain to us what it's like, James. Help us understand how a man justifies lying to his wife for months while conducting an affair with another married woman. Isabella tried one more time to regain control of the situation. This is all being blown out of proportion. Yes, James and I have developed feelings for each other, but we never meant for anyone to get hurt. We've been trying to figure out how to handle the situation respectfully. Respectfully. I laughed, and it came out sharp and bitter. You call secretly planning romantic vacations while lying to your spouses respectful? You call using our money to fund your affair respectful? The money. James started to say, then stopped. Yes, let's talk about the money, I continued, feeling like I was gaining momentum. Let's talk about how you used funds from our joint business, the business I helped you start with my grandmother's inheritance, to pay for your romantic getaway with another woman. Let's talk about how you've been stealing from our marriage to fund your affair. James looked like he was going to be sick. I was going to pay it back. With what? The profits from the business deals you've been making with your girlfriend? The deals that are probably more about your personal relationship than actual business merit. The accusation hit its mark. I could see it in James's face, the way his shoulders slumped in defeat. Whatever business he'd been doing with Isabella's company was compromised by their personal relationship, and we all knew it. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Isabella said quietly, her sophisticated facade finally cracking completely. This is why these situations are so complicated. Business and personal relationships getting tangled up. You were afraid of getting caught, David corrected. There's a difference. The four of us sat in that elegant private dining room, surrounded by crystal and fine china and all the trappings of civilized society, while our marriages imploded in real time. The contrast was almost absurd, discussing betrayal and lies and the destruction of trust while classical music played softly in the background. So what happens now? Isabella asked finally, her voice small and defeated in a way that didn't match her usual confident persona. I looked at David, and he looked back at me, and I realized that we hadn't actually planned this part. We'd been so focused on the confrontation itself that we hadn't thought through what came after the revelation, after the shock, after the moment when our cheating spouses realized they'd been caught. Now, I said slowly, feeling my way through the words as I spoke them. Now you get to experience what it feels like to have your comfortable lies torn away. Now you get to sit with the consequences of your choices. Now you get to figure out how to rebuild the trust you've destroyed, if that's even possible. And now, David added, his voice carrying the weight of 12 years of marriage, you get to explain to your friends and families and business partners how you managed to destroy 2 marriages for the sake of an affair that you were too cowardly to handle honestly. James and Isabella looked at each other then, and I saw something pass between them that made my stomach twist. Even caught, even exposed, even facing the destruction of their marriages, they were still connected. Still unified against us, the spouses they'd betrayed. That look told me everything I needed to know about where their loyalties really lay. And it told me that the confrontation was just the beginning. The aftermath of that dinner was like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. You know the building is going to fall, but you can't look away from the precision of the destruction. James and Isabella left the restaurant together that night, which told me everything I needed to know about their priorities. Even faced with the collapse of their marriages, they chose each other over the spouses they'd betrayed. David and I watched them walk out through the restaurant's elegant dining room, Isabella's hand on James's arm in a gesture that was either comfort or possession. Well, David said after they disappeared into the New York night, that went exactly as badly as I expected and somehow worse than I'd imagined. We sat in that private dining room for another hour, drinking expensive wine and processing what had just happened. The confrontation had been everything we'd planned and nothing like we'd hoped. Yes, we'd exposed their affair. Yes, we'd taken away their control and forced them to face consequences. But watching them leave together had been like watching them choose their affair over their marriages in real time. I thought he'd at least try to fight for us, I admitted to David as we finally prepared to leave. I thought seeing me dressed up, seeing that I'd put effort into our marriage, might remind him of what he was throwing away. Isabella didn't even look back, David said quietly. 12 years of marriage, and she walked out without a single glance over her shoulder. We exchanged phone numbers and promised to keep in touch, 2 soldiers who'd fought a battle together and lost despite being morally in the right. David hugged me goodbye outside the restaurant, and it felt like the end of something and the beginning of something else entirely. You deserve so much better than James Patterson, he told me before getting into his taxi. Don't let this make you forget that. I rode the train back to Westchester in a strange state of emotional numbness. I'd expected to feel victorious or devastated or angry, but instead I felt empty, like I'd used up all my emotions in one explosive evening and had nothing left. James didn't come home that night, or the next night, or the night after that. He finally showed up on Monday morning while I was having coffee in our kitchen, looking like he'd been sleeping in his clothes and living on stress and guilt. He sat down across from me at the table where we'd shared thousands of meals over 8 years of marriage, and I realized I had no idea what to say to him. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I never meant for this to happen." "Which part?" I asked. "The affair, or getting caught?" James flinched like I'd slapped him. "The affair. I never meant to fall in love with someone else." Fall in love. Not have an affair or make a mistake or cross a line. Fall in love. As if it had been something that happened to him rather than a choice he'd made every day for months. "When did it start?" I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "The feelings? Or the physical relationship?" The fact that he made a distinction between the two told me everything I needed to know about how long this betrayal had been building. Both. I met Isabella 8 months ago at a conference in London. She was brilliant and funny, and she understood the international market in ways that... He stopped talking when he saw my face. The feelings started then. The physical relationship started about 4 months ago. 4 months. For months of elaborate lies and secret meetings and stolen moments while I made his coffee every morning and asked about his day every evening. For months of him coming home to me after being with her, using the same hands that had touched her body to hold me when I was sad or scared or lonely. "Where?" I asked. "What?" "Where did you have sex with her? What hotels? What cities? What?" I needed to know how extensive the betrayal was, how many of his supposed business trips had really been romantic getaways. "Becca, please don't do this to yourself. Answer the question, James. I think after 8 years of marriage and 4 months of adultery, I deserve to know the scope of what you've done." He told me. All of it. London, Dubai, Miami, Las Vegas. Hotel rooms that I'd helped pay for through our joint finances. Romantic dinners that he'd written off as business expenses. Weekend trips that he described to me as tedious work obligations. The most devastating part wasn't the sex or even the romance. It was learning how much effort he'd put into the affair, the planning, the coordination, the careful attention to details that he hadn't shown our marriage in years. He'd been more thoughtful and creative in betraying me than he'd been in loving me. "Do you love her?" I asked when he finished his litany of deception. James was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands folded on our kitchen table. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were red with tears that I didn't feel sorry for. "Yes," he said simply. "I do." The honesty was like a punch to the gut, but it was also a relief. At least now I knew where I stood. At least now I knew that this wasn't about sex or excitement or midlife crisis. This was about love, the love he felt for someone else and the love he'd stopped feeling for me. "Then why are you here?" I asked. "Why aren't you with Isabella, starting your new life together?" "Because I made vows to you," James said, his voice breaking. "Because we built a life together. Because I keep thinking there has to be a way to fix this, to make it right somehow." "You want to fix this? After 4 months of systematic betrayal? After lying to my face every single day? After using our money to fund your affair?" I stood up from the table, feeling anger replace the numbness that had been protecting me. "You want to fix this by what, exactly? Giving up the woman you love to stay with the wife you've been deceiving?" "I don't know," James admitted. "I don't know how to fix it. I just know I can't stand the thought of losing you completely." "You already lost me," I said quietly. "The moment you decided that your happiness mattered more than our marriage, you lost me." The moment you decided to build a secret life with someone else instead of talking to me about whatever was missing in our relationship, you lost me." James started crying then, ugly, desperate tears that made him look like a stranger. "Please don't say that. Please tell me there's a way to save this." But I realized, standing in our kitchen surrounded by the remnants of our ordinary life, that I didn't want to save it. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if he was thinking about Isabella when he kissed me. I didn't want to rebuild trust with someone who'd proven so thoroughly that he was capable of elaborate, long-term deception. I didn't want to compete with a ghost for my own husband's attention and affection. Most of all, I didn't want to go back to being the grateful wife who accepted whatever scraps of love he was willing to give me. "I want you to leave," I said calmly. "I want you to pack your things and leave our house, and I want you to figure out what kind of man you want to be without dragging me through your identity crisis. Becca, please. Leave, James. Go to Isabella, go to a hotel, go wherever you want. Just don't stay here and ask me to help you process your guilt about betraying me." He left that afternoon with 2 suitcases and a box of personal items from his office. I watched him load his car from our living room window, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: relief. For the first time in 8 years, I was alone in my own life, answerable only to myself, free to make decisions based on what I wanted instead of what would keep my husband happy. It was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely necessary. David called me that evening to check in. Isabella had apparently made a similar choice, moving out of their apartment to give him space to process, but really, we both knew, to be with James without the complication of guilty spouses demanding explanations and apologies. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better than I expected," I admitted. "Sad, but also lighter, like I've been holding my breath for months and can finally exhale." "I know exactly what you mean," David said. "It's strange how liberating it can be to stop pretending everything is fine when it's clearly not." We talked for over an hour, 2 people who'd had their lives blown apart and were trying to figure out how to build something new from the rubble. It wasn't romantic. We were both too raw and hurt for anything like that, but it was honest in a way that felt precious after months of lies and half-truths. "What happens next?" I asked him before we hung up. "I don't know," David said. "But for the first time in years, I get to decide for myself." That night, I slept alone in the bed I'd shared with James for 8 years, and I didn't miss him. I missed the marriage I'd thought we had. I missed the future I'd thought we were building together, but I didn't miss the man who'd been lying to me while planning romantic vacations with someone else. I missed the version of James who'd never existed at all. 3 weeks after James moved out, I discovered that revenge is a dish best served with legal documentation and a really good attorney. My divorce lawyer, Patricia Hendricks, was exactly the kind of woman I wished I'd been during my marriage: sharp, uncompromising, and completely unwilling to accept less than her clients deserved. She was recommended by my sister Patricia, who'd flown in from Portland the day after James left and had been staying with me ever since, alternately feeding me takeout and reminding me that I was better off without a man who treated our marriage like a part-time commitment. "The good news," attorney Patricia told me during our first consultation, "is that New York is a no-fault divorce state, which means we don't have to prove adultery to dissolve the marriage. The bad news is that adultery doesn't automatically mean you get everything in the settlement." "What about the business?" I asked. Patterson International Holdings was started with my inheritance. I helped him build it from nothing. Patricia's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Now that's where things get interesting. If James has been using marital assets to conduct an affair, and if he's been mixing business expenses with personal ones for the benefit of his mistress, we have grounds for a much more aggressive approach." I'd brought her everything: bank statements, credit card bills, travel receipts, business contracts, and most damning of all, the evidence of James and Isabella's business partnership that had clearly been influenced by their personal relationship. Attorney Patricia spread it all out on her conference table like a general planning a military campaign. "This yacht charter in Dubai," she said, holding up the receipt that had started my investigation. "Paid for with business funds, but clearly for personal use. These hotel suites, these romantic dinners, these couple spa treatments, all business expenses according to your husband's accounting, but all obviously personal in nature." Can we prove that? With photos of them together in romantic settings during what were supposedly business trips? Absolutely. Your husband has been committing tax fraud while cheating on you. It's almost impressive in its stupidity. But the real nuclear option came from an unexpected source, David Reed. He called me on a Thursday afternoon, his voice tight with controlled anger that I recognized from our own conversations. Rebecca, I need to ask you something. Does Patterson International Holdings have any contracts with overseas shell companies? Anything in the Cayman Islands or Switzerland? I don't know, I admitted. James handled all the international business arrangements. Why? Because Isabella just got very nervous when I mentioned that I was having an accountant review our joint finances. She started talking about how complex international business law can be, how sometimes money has to be moved through different entities for tax purposes. My blood went cold. Are you saying they've been hiding money? I'm saying Isabella knows something about international tax avoidance that she's suddenly very concerned about. And if she and James have been mixing business and personal relationships, there's a good chance they've been mixing legitimate business expenses with money laundering too. Attorney Patricia's eyes lit up when I told her about David's discovery. If we can prove that your husband has been using the business to hide assets or avoid taxes, we're not just talking about divorce proceedings anymore. We're talking about federal fraud charges. The investigation that followed was swift and brutal. When you have an angry spouse, a suspicious business partner, and a team of forensic accountants digging through every financial transaction, it's amazing how quickly elaborate schemes fall apart. James and Isabella had been running money through a series of offshore accounts, claiming business expenses for personal trips, and using Patterson International Holdings to funnel Isabella's real estate profits through tax havens. What had started as an affair had evolved into a full-scale financial conspiracy that involved multiple federal crimes. The confrontation at 11 Madison Park had been nothing compared to the morning FBI agents showed up at Isabella's luxury apartment with search warrants and handcuffs. David called me as soon as he heard. They arrested her at the hospital, he said, his voice a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. She was having lunch with colleagues when federal agents walked into the cafeteria and took her away in custody. What about James? Arrested at his hotel this morning. Apparently he's been staying at the St. Regis since he left your house. Even facing federal fraud charges, he couldn't lower his standards to a regular hotel. I felt a complex mix of emotions hearing about James's arrest. Relief that he was facing consequences for his actions. Vindication that my suspicions about the scope of his betrayal had been correct. And underneath it all, a deep sadness for the man I'd thought I'd married, who apparently had never existed at all. The media attention was immediate and vicious. Power couple's affair leads to federal fraud charges, read the headline in the New York Post. James's mugshot ran next to Isabella's on the front page of the business section, looking like the criminals they'd apparently become. My phone rang constantly. Reporters wanting quotes, neighbors wanting gossip, old friends suddenly interested in my well-being after years of casual contact. I stopped answering calls from numbers I didn't recognize and started screening my emails for interview requests and book deal offers. You're famous, my sister Patricia observed dryly, scrolling through news coverage on her laptop while we ate breakfast in my kitchen. The wronged wife who brought down the cheating financial criminals. You're like a suburban vigilante. I just wanted to know who Isabella Reed was, I said, still processing how my simple investigation had uncovered such an elaborate criminal enterprise. I never intended to expose federal fraud. Maybe not, Patricia said, but you did exactly what needed to be done. How many other people were they stealing from? How many tax dollars did they cheat the government out of? You didn't just save your own marriage, you probably saved other people from being victims of their schemes. The strangest part of the whole experience was how vindicated I felt. For months, I'd been questioning my own perceptions, wondering if I was being paranoid or jealous or unreasonable. Finding out that James's betrayal was even worse than I'd suspected, that it involved not just adultery but actual federal crimes, made me feel like my instincts had been completely correct. I wasn't a suspicious, paranoid wife. I was a woman whose husband had been systematically lying to her about multiple aspects of his life, including criminal activity that put our entire future at risk. David and I met for coffee the day after the arrests, both of us trying to process how our simple revenge plan had escalated into federal criminal charges and media coverage. "Do you regret it?" he asked me as we sat in a quiet cafe in Westchester, as far from the Manhattan media circus as we could get. I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret exposing James and Isabella's affair? Did I regret the confrontation that had led to the investigation that had uncovered their financial crimes? Did I regret the fact that my husband was facing potential prison time instead of just divorce proceedings? No, I said finally. I regret that I trusted him for so long. I regret that I ignored red flags and made excuses for his behavior. I regret that I spent 8 years of my life building something with someone who was capable of this level of deception. But I don't regret finding out the truth, no matter how ugly it turned out to be. David nodded slowly. Isabella tried to call me from jail. She wanted me to post her bail, to stand by her during the legal proceedings. She said I owed her that much after 12 years of marriage. What did you tell her? I told her that she'd already collected everything she was owed from our marriage when she decided to steal from it to fund her affair. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people who'd been through a shared trauma and come out the other side with a better understanding of our own worth. "The lawyers say the trials will take months," David said eventually. "Maybe over a year with appeals and everything. Are you going to stay in New York?" "I'm thinking about taking a position at a hospital in Colorado," he admitted. "Fresh start, clean slate, somewhere without memories of Isabella around every corner." I understood the impulse completely. Our house in Westchester was full of ghosts, not just of James, but of the woman I'd been when I'd lived there with him. The woman who'd accepted emotional crumbs and called it love. The woman who'd been grateful for whatever attention her husband was willing to give her. I didn't want to be that woman anymore. "I've been thinking about selling the house," I told David. "Using my share of the business assets to start over somewhere new." "Any idea where?" I smiled, feeling something like hope for the first time in months. "Somewhere warm. Somewhere I've never been before. Somewhere James Patterson has never set foot." "That sounds perfect," David said. "You deserve a fresh start, Rebecca. You deserve a life that's entirely your own." As I drove home from coffee with David, I passed the airport where I'd dropped James off for his Dubai trip just a few weeks ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then, like I was a completely different person from the woman who'd kissed her husband goodbye and driven home to play with his dogs. That woman had been living a lie without even knowing it. This woman, the one behind the wheel right now, knew exactly what she was worth and exactly what she wouldn't accept ever again. It was a much better way to live. 6 months later, I was sitting on a beach in San Diego, watching the sunset paint the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and pink, when my phone buzzed with a text from attorney Patricia. "James pleaded guilty. Sentencing next month. Isabella's still fighting, but the evidence is overwhelming. You're free, Rebecca. Officially and completely free." Free. Such a simple word, but it felt like the most important text message I'd ever received. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, along with a business dissolution that gave me a substantial settlement. James had been so eager to avoid additional financial scrutiny during his criminal proceedings that he'd agreed to almost everything my lawyer had demanded. The house in Westchester was sold, the business assets divided, and my inheritance, plus interest and damages, was returned to me in full. More importantly, I discovered that I was capable of rebuilding my entire life from scratch. The move to San Diego had been impulsive, the kind of decision the old Rebecca never would have made without consulting committees and making pro and con lists and seeking everyone else's approval. But the new Rebecca, the one who'd learned that trusting her instincts could literally save her from criminal association, had looked at a map, pointed to a city she'd never visited, and bought a one-way plane ticket. I'd rented a small apartment near the beach, enrolled in a digital marketing certification program, and started freelancing for tech companies that appreciated good design and didn't care about my personal drama. The work was challenging and creative in ways that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with graphic design in the first place, before I'd gotten distracted by playing house with a man who'd see me as a convenience rather than a partner. But the best part of my new life was the solitude. For the first time since college, I was answerable only to myself. I could eat cereal for dinner or stay up until 3 a.m. working on a project or spend entire weekends reading novels without anyone commenting on my choices or expecting me to accommodate their preferences. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed my own company. David and I had stayed in touch, texting occasionally and talking every few weeks. He'd taken the position in Colorado and seemed to be thriving in the mountains, hiking and skiing and rediscovering parts of himself that had been buried under 12 years of trying to keep Isabella happy. In our last conversation, he'd mentioned a colleague he was interested in asking out, a pediatric nurse who loved outdoor adventures and had never heard of Isabella Reed. "Are you ready for that?" I'd asked him. "Dating someone new?" "I think so," he'd said thoughtfully. "Not because I'm over what Isabella did, but because I'm over who I was when I was with her. I'm ready to find out who I might be with someone who actually sees me as an equal partner." I understood exactly what he meant. The betrayal of our marriages had been devastating, but it had also been educational. We'd both learned what we wouldn't accept, what we actually wanted in a relationship, and most importantly, what we were worth. Now, sitting on this beach with my laptop and a glass of wine, I was working on a design project for a startup that was developing apps to help domestic abuse survivors escape dangerous relationships safely. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd become an expert on recognizing deception and manipulation, skills that were apparently valuable in more contexts than I'd realized. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an unknown number. Usually I let those go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Rebecca, it's James." My blood went cold. He was supposed to be in federal prison, serving the 3-year sentence he'd received for tax fraud and money laundering. Why was he calling me? How was he calling me? "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "I wanted to apologize," he said, his voice hoarse like he'd been crying. "Really apologize. Not the bullshit I gave you before. I wanted you to know that I understand now how much I destroyed, how much I threw away." "Okay," I said carefully. "I appreciate the apology. But James, you're not supposed to be contacting me. The restraining order." I know. I'm not trying to harass you or win you back or anything like that. Prison gives you a lot of time to think. About your choices, about who you really are, about what really matters. And I realized that I spent 8 years married to an incredible woman and I was too selfish and stupid to appreciate what I had. I watched the waves roll onto the beach while my ex-husband, the man who betrayed me so thoroughly that federal agents had gotten involved, tried to express remorse over a contraband phone call from prison. "I'm glad you've had time for reflection," I said finally. "I hope it helps you make better choices in the future. Rebecca, I need you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. Not getting caught, not going to prison, not losing the business, losing you. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too much of an idiot to realize it until it was too late." His words should have felt satisfying. For months after our marriage imploded, I'd fantasized about James realizing what he'd lost, about him understanding that I'd been valuable and loving and worth fighting for. I'd imagined him regretting his choices and wanting me back and finally seeing me as more than just a convenient caretaker. But now that it was happening, I felt nothing but sadness for him. "James," I said gently, "I need you to understand something. You didn't lose me because you made a mistake. You lost me because you spent months making a series of deliberate choices that showed me exactly how little our marriage meant to you. You chose Isabella over me every single day for 4 months. You chose lies over honesty, theft over integrity, and your own immediate gratification over our shared future." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I did all of that. But if I could take it back." "You can't," I interrupted. "And more importantly, I wouldn't want you to. Because going through all of this taught me something crucial about myself. I'm worth more than settling for someone who has to lose me to realize I was valuable." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. "Are you happy?" he asked finally, his voice small and defeated. I looked around at my new life, my beachfront apartment, my successful freelance business, my independence, my peace of mind, my complete freedom to make choices based on what I wanted rather than what would keep someone else comfortable. Yes, I said honestly. I'm happier than I've been in years. I'm happier than I was for most of our marriage, if I'm being completely honest. I'm glad, James said, and I could tell he was crying. I'm glad you found happiness, even if it's not with me. You deserve that, Rebecca. You always deserved better than what I gave you. Yes, I did, I agreed. And now I know that, which means I'll never accept less again. I have to go, he said abruptly. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that I know I ruined the best thing in my life. Take care of yourself, Rebecca. You're an amazing woman, and whoever gets to love you next is going to be the luckiest man in the world. The line went dead, and I sat there on the beach holding my phone, processing the conversation I'd never expected to have. A year ago, hearing James say those words would have meant everything to me. It would have validated all the pain and anger and sense of betrayal I'd been carrying. It would have proved that I'd been right to feel overlooked and undervalued in our marriage. But now, it just felt like closure. James had finally understood what he'd lost, but I'd moved so far beyond needing his validation that his realization felt almost irrelevant to my current life. I'd built something new and better without him, discovered parts of myself that had been dormant during our marriage, and learned to value my own opinion of myself more than anyone else's. That night, I called David to tell him about James's phone call. He'd had a similar conversation with Isabella the week before, he told me, a tearful phone call from prison where she'd begged his forgiveness and promised she'd changed and asked if there was any possibility of reconciliation. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her that the woman I'd married had died the day I found out about her affair, he said simply. The Isabella calling me from prison was a stranger who'd been wearing my wife's face for months while systematically destroying everything we'd built together. That's a harsh way to put it, but I think you're right, I said. The James the first married wouldn't have been capable of what my ex-husband did. Either I never really knew him, or he became someone completely different. Either way, that marriage was over long before I found those boarding passes. Do you ever regret how it all played out? David asked. The confrontation, the investigation, the criminal charges. I thought about it seriously. James and Isabella were both serving prison sentences, their careers were destroyed, their reputations were in ruins. The media coverage had been brutal, following them through arrests and trials and sentencing. Their affair had cost them everything, their marriages, their freedom, their futures. But they'd made those choices themselves. Every lie they'd told, every law they'd broken, every betrayal they'd committed, those had been deliberate decisions made by adults who'd thought they were too smart to face consequences. No, I said finally. I don't regret any of it. They thought they could have everything: successful careers, exciting affair, devoted spouses at home, hidden money, romantic adventures, without paying any price for their choices. They thought they were smarter than everyone else and that the rules didn't apply to them. And now they know better. Now they know better, I agreed. And more importantly, we know better too. We know what we're worth, what we won't tolerate, and what we actually want in our lives. After I hung up with David, I walked down to the edge of the ocean and let the waves wash over my feet. The water was cold and shocking, but in a way that felt cleansing rather than uncomfortable. A year ago, I'd been a woman who made her husband's coffee every morning and packed his lunches with love notes and waited at home with his dogs while he lived his real life with someone else. I'd been grateful for whatever scraps of attention he was willing to give me and had somehow convinced myself that being a natural caretaker was a compliment rather than a dismissal. Tonight, I was a woman who'd blown up her entire life to avoid settling for less than she deserved, who'd rebuilt herself from scratch in a new city, who'd learned to trust her own instincts and prioritize her own happiness. The transformation had been painful and scary and sometimes lonely, but it had also been absolutely necessary. As I walked back to my apartment, I passed a couple walking hand in hand along the beach, laughing together in a way that spoke of genuine connection and mutual delight in each other's company. A year ago, Seeing that kind of intimacy would have made me ache with longing for what James and I had lost. But tonight, it just made me smile. Because I knew now that I was capable of building that kind of connection with someone who actually saw me as an equal partner worth pursuing and cherishing and being honest with. And I knew that I'd never again settle for anything less. The old Rebecca had been so afraid of being alone that she'd accepted being lonely in her own marriage. The new Rebecca had learned that being alone was infinitely better than being with someone who made you feel invisible. 6 months in San Diego had taught me that I was excellent company for myself, that I could build a life I loved without needing anyone else's approval or participation, and that the right person would enhance my happiness rather than be responsible for creating it. If that person never showed up, I'd be perfectly fine. And if someone did eventually earn the privilege of sharing my life, they'd be getting a woman who knew exactly what she was worth and exactly what she would and wouldn't accept. Either way, I was going to be just fine. As I settled into my apartment for the night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete contentment with my own choices, my own life, and my own company. James had been right about one thing in his phone call. I was an amazing woman. I just wished it hadn't taken destroying my marriage to a criminal for me to finally believe it myself. But maybe that's what real strength looks like sometimes. Maybe it's not about never falling down. Maybe it's about getting back up, brushing yourself off, and building something even better than what you lost. And maybe, sometimes, the best revenge isn't plotting elaborate confrontations or exposing federal crimes or watching your cheating ex-husband go to prison. Maybe the best revenge is simply living well, knowing your worth, and never settling for less than you deserve ever again. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for taking this journey with me. If you're going through something similar, please know that you deserve better than someone who makes you question your own value. You deserve someone who sees you as their first choice, not their backup plan. You deserve honesty, respect, and a love that doesn't require you to shrink yourself to accommodate someone else's deception. Most importantly, you deserve to know that you're strong enough to rebuild your life if it turns out the person you trusted with your heart was never worthy of that trust in the first place. Take care of yourselves, beautiful souls. You're worth more than you know.